We will fight to win. US President Trump lays out his new strategy for Afghanistan, announcing an end to time-based strategies and promising to boost troops and funding. Spanish police shoot dead the suspect they've been tracking in relation to Thursday's deadly Barcelona van attack, as the victim death toll rises to 15. And millions of Americans turn their gaze to the skies as a total solar eclipse sweeps across the country. Hello and welcome to this special edition on France 24. US President Donald Trump has just given a national security address from Fort Myer in Arlington, Virginia. He described a new strategy in Afghanistan which will step away from timeframes, surprising those who expected him to cite dates and figures on boosts to troops and funds.
We will not talk about numbers of troops or our plans for further military activities. Conditions on the ground, not arbitrary timetables, will guide our strategy from now on. America's enemies must never know our plans or believe they can wait us out. I will not say when we are going to attack, but attack we will. We will no longer use American military might to construct democracies in faraway lands or try to rebuild other countries in our own image. Those days are now over. America will work with the Afghan government as long as we see determination and progress. However, our commitment is not unlimited, and our support is not a blank check.
I'm now joined live on the line with our correspondent in Washington, Philip Crowther. Philip, no announcements on troop numbers. Why did Trump fail to confirm the figures that have been circulating?
He doesn't want to talk about it. This is a U.S. president who says he wants to make changes to what his predecessor had done, and that many times had been an announcement of when troops might leave Afghanistan, when others might be added to the troops already in place, and when an end date for the war might be set. Obama wanted this war to be over by the end of his presidency. That's where we're seeing a very clear difference from Obama to Trump. We do know, though, that the Defense Secretary, Jim Mattis, would like a relatively sizable troop increase. It could be 4,000 further U.S. troops that will be sent to Afghanistan. And there are other members of his inner circle, former members of the military, former generals, who would like an even bigger troop increase in Afghanistan. What was clear here from Donald Trump is that the United States will remain involved in Afghanistan, will remain at war in Afghanistan, and that there will be no withdrawal of U.S. troops at this point.
Yes, Phil, of course he was saying there will be no end to the U.S. involvement until victory. What kind of definition of victory are we looking at?
Well, there really has been a very clear victory, a very clear explanation, rather, or definition of what victory would entail in Afghanistan. But there was a pretty clear one here from Donald Trump in a few different parts. First of all, he sees victory as the complete defeat of ISIS or the Islamic State group because it has taken a foothold in Afghanistan. The defeat of al-Qaeda also he sees as an element of the victory in Afghanistan. Of course, al-Qaeda still not defeated after a 16-year-long war in Afghanistan, which in part at least was precisely in order to beat the terrorist group and defeat it. Donald Trump also says the United States wants to make sure that the Taliban won't be able to take power again in Afghanistan, and he wants to make sure that there will be no further terror attacks in the United States, for example, that might be organized in Afghanistan. Those are some of the elements of what Donald Trump defines as a victory in Afghanistan. It might be a very long war, an even longer war than the one that the United States is already fighting after 16 years. There was simply no end date announced by Donald Trump, and the victory that he described is one that won't be easy to get.
And Trump spoke of an eventual potential solution involving the Taliban. What could he mean here?
Well, that's new. That is something that we weren't necessarily expecting to hear from Donald Trump. He says that At the end of it all, presumably that would be in the case of a defeat of the Taliban, or at the very least a partial defeat of the Taliban, and in case of victories over Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State organization, the United States might be in a position where it would admit some kind of talks and negotiations with any remnants that might remain of the Taliban. That is something that the administration, this one and previous ones, had not said that clearly before. It's an interesting move by Donald Trump, but it is a very hypothetical one because any negotiations with the Taliban would only come at the end of what he defines as victory in Afghanistan. But this is something that will be poured over, that this is a U.S. president who would be willing to speak to the Taliban.
Philip Crowther reporting from Washington. Thank you very much for that update. And moving on to Barcelona, Spanish police say the man they shot dead just outside the city this Monday is the suspect they've been searching for. They confirmed that 22-year-old Younes Abouyakoub was responsible for last Thursday's van attack on the La Rambla promenade. The victim death toll from that day has risen to 15. Emerald Maxwell has more.
He was the last accomplice still at large, a member of the cell accused of being behind the attacks in Barcelona and Cambrils. Now police have shot dead Younes Abouyakoub in the area of Subirats, following a 5-day manhunt. He was wearing what appeared to be an explosives belt. The rural area is just 40 kilometers from where he allegedly ploughed a van down Las Ramblas, killing and wounding pedestrians.
Just before 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the Catalan police has shot dead Younes Abouyakoub, driver of the van and direct perpetrator of the attack in Barcelona on Thursday.
Police say the death toll from the attacks that day has risen to include a man whose body was found in an abandoned car. Abouyakoub allegedly stabbed him when he hijacked the vehicle to flee the city. Police also confirmed that the imam who is believed to have radicalized the rest of the terror cell was also killed in an accidental explosion at a house in Alcanar, south of Barcelona, that was being used as a bomb factory.
The remains indicate there were 2 people, and based on the witnesses' accounts and some seized documents, the evidence points to the imam as the person present that night at the Alcanar address.
Of the 12 known accomplices, 8 are now dead. 4 are being held and will go in front of the High Court in Madrid.
In the town of Ripoll, where the Moroccan-born suspect and many of the other suspects came from, locals are struggling to understand how a seemingly well-integrated young man could have been radicalized. Our Spain correspondent Sarah Morris filled us in.
This has really shocked the town where many of the suspects came from. Ripoll is really not your image of a hotbed of jihadist terrorists. Many of the people there remembered some of these suspects at school. They said they were well integrated into the village, and questions now are being asked exactly how well integrated they were and why were they so prone to be radicalized by this 40-something-year-old radical imam who is believed to have died at that house in Alcanar. Now, that imam, there are suggestions that he may have traveled to Brussels, he may have traveled also to France and could even be linked in other attacks. But certainly the Spaniards are scratching their head as to whether Spain has a particular problem with these cells. And we know that there's been about 20 arrests of ISIS-related terrorist suspects this year, and more than half of those have been in Catalonia. And that's going to be a question that the schools, the local communities will all have to answer.
Angola is gearing up for a presidential election this Wednesday. The People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, which has ruled the country since independence from Portugal in 1975, is expected to win the election. One of its main challengers is Rafael Savimbi of the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola party. Now, Caroline Dumais, Stefan Carstens and Simon Harding tell us more about him in this special France 24 report.
We're saying vote on the 23rd of August. Vote UNITA, vote for Samakuva.
UNITA, Angola's main opposition party, has been battling to gain control of the country for over 50 years. Raphael Savimbi is the son of historic rebel Jonas Savimbi and a key party member. He's on the campaign trail calling for change.
Whether it's President Samakuva or any leader of the UNITA, we're surrounded by huge crowds. People say they're fed up, tired of the regime. They want a change.
Raphael is hoping to build on his father's legacy and inject more political diversity and transparency to Angolan democracy.
The fight is the same. Of course, the context has changed, but Savimbi had good intentions, and we think we should have the same attitude. The children, for instance, should show the way. My mother, however, is very hesitant. Being the wife of a man like my father wasn't easy. She knows how difficult it is to do politics in Africa.
In power since independence in 1975, the MPLA heads back to the polls on Wednesday. For the first time, its leader, José Eduardo dos Santos, will not be running for office. The 74-year-old's retirement from politics introduces a rare uncertainty over what happens next.
Obviously, we're having a different type of competition, new actors who are ready for new forms of governance. I think UNITA is well positioned to do well this time, and why not maybe win these elections?
However, any change is still likely to be gradual. UNITA won only 18% of the vote in the last election. To stand against the MPLA, it would have to form a coalition with other opposition parties.
Hundreds of people have been evacuated in southern Russia after a huge fire broke out in the city of Rostov-on-Don. Both residents and the fire brigade worked for hours to control the blaze that burned dozens of houses and left scores of people injured. Alexander Okot reports.
Firefighting helicopters working desperately to control the massive inferno at the heart of Rostov-on-Don. Fanned by strong winds, the fire quickly enveloped a residential neighborhood in the southern Russian city that sits close to the border with Ukraine. Before fire teams arrived, residents had rushed to try to contain it themselves. Dozens were injured, and around 30 homes were burnt to cinders.
We're pouring water on it. This is terrible. So many people will be left homeless.
The fire erupted at an abandoned wooden house in the city centre. Russian media reported allegations from residents that arsonists had started it to help real estate developers get their hands on a prized plot of land. The regional governor and local prosecutors have promised to investigate the claims.
This Monday, millions of Americans have put on special protective glasses to watch the moon blot out the sun. Sharon Gaffney tells us more.
Glasses on in 10 seconds, it says.
It's been just under 100 years since the last time a total solar eclipse swept coast to coast across the US. Millions of skywatchers and amateur astronomers flocked to viewing points to watch the moon's shadow pass directly in front of the sun, blotting out its light.
I've wanted to see one of these my whole life, since I've been studying astronomy since I was a kid, and I thought I was prepared for it. I totally wasn't. I was shaking, I was crying, I was just totally taken aback by just how beautiful it was.
I still have goosebumps that are completely over my body because that's what it was. Yeah. You think you know something, you think you're prepared for it, but you have absolutely no idea.
The eclipse could be seen in 14 states, beginning in the west coast at Oregon and ending 90 minutes later over South Carolina.
The shadow path across the Earth is usually in the water, like across the ocean, or it's in hard-to-get places. This path actually goes across all the United States. It starts in Oregon and goes across, and so it's called the Great American Eclipse because so many Americans can see it and witness totality.
The next time such an event occurs in the US won't be until 2045.
More news in 15 minutes.